In this video, we're going to discuss farm structure. What is farm structure? Farm structure is the study and analysis of the farm characteristics such as the physical and economical size of the farms and the characteristics of the farm manager and their family. So what does this really mean? What farm structure is doing is it's taking all of these different types of farms and actually placing them into categories. First off, would you ever consider there to be a typical farm? How about an average farm? There's definitely not a typical or definitely not an average farm. Matter of fact, if you start throwing averages on there, it starts covering up a lot more stuff than it starts revealing. If you think about it, you've got farms in the Midwest that might be 10,000 acres, and then you've got this little show animal operation that's being run out of a backyard. Technically, both of those are considered farms, but they're both very vastly different. Well, what does it take to be a farm according to the USDA? It takes $1,000 in sales of an agricultural good, just $1,000. We saw whenever cattle prices were real high that a 6-weight calf could go for over $1,000. So somebody who sold a calf would be considered a farm. Anybody who raises animals and sells them for over $1,000, that is considered a farm according to the USDA. So if you think about it, you've got the show animal industry where there might be 3 or 4 animals that these people are raising, and they're considered a farm. And then you've got this farm in the Midwest that's 10,000 acres, and they're doing soybeans, corn, cotton, and everything else, and wheat, and they're also considered a farm. So you start trying to throw in averages and typical farms, and it actually starts covering up more than what it's actually revealing. So the USDA developed this farm structure, farm structure is this analysis of these economic sizes and physical size. So I want to talk about 3 different things. I want to talk about, first off, the number of farms in the U.S., the ownership of these farms, and lastly, the farm types. So the first thing I want to talk about is the number of farms in the U.S. It used to be that the majority of the people within the U.S. were considered farmers. That is not the case today. 1.6 of the U.S. population currently are considered farmers. Anybody who has over $1,000 in agricultural sales is considered a farmer. That constitutes only 1.6% of the population. Currently, there's about 2 million farms within the United States. I want to compare that to in 1915, we had 6.5 million farms. So in just a little over a century, you could say we've lost 4.5 million farms. Well, where did they go? Where did those 4.5 million farms go that we technically are considering that we lost? Well, we really didn't lose those farms. We just consolidated them. We had these 2 million farms basically absorb those 6.5. So now what happened is we had a whole lot of farms, and then we had a few individuals start buying up those farms. So now rather than seeing 6.5 million smaller farms, we see 2 million rather large farms in the United States. An amazing statistic is that, and this is a little bit outdated, but according to the text, when the text was written, a single farmer feeds 152 Americans and also exports to over 50 more people. So a single farmer in the United States will now feed over 200 people. And that number has actually gone up in the past recent years. The next thing I want to talk about is ownership. So there was a myth going around saying that in agriculture we're losing our family farms. Our family farms are going away from the family and they're going into corporations. They're going into companies. Major corporations are beginning to own all of these farms, and there's no such thing as a typical American family farmer anymore. That's simply not true. 98% of family farms 98% of farms are family owned. They are still family owned and operated. Of those 98% of those farms, 90% of those farms are sole proprietors. This is whenever you have a single family owning it. Such as you think about the typical farmer, you've got the dad that owns the the company, or the mom and dad that technically own the business, and then they have the kids working for them. And that would be a sole proprietor. A single person, a single entity owns that farm. 90% of all of the family-owned farms are still that way. The rest of them have been transformed into partnership or corporations. And these are family partnerships or family corporations. Well, what does that mean? It means that maybe two brothers decided they were going to go into a partnership together and formed a partnership, but they're both in the same family. So they, as a family, started a partnership. Or maybe for tax reasons or other legal reasons, they formed a corporation. But it's still a family corporation. So 98% of the farms in the United States are still family-owned and operated. Another amazing thing is, of these 98% of these family farms, they produce a little under 85% of all the food that we eat. So 85% of the food that we eat comes from family-owned and operated farms. Now you compare that to what people consider to be the real truth, which is actually a myth, is that a lot of farms are not family-owned and operated. They're owned by corporations. In reality, only 2.2% of farms are actually owned by corporations or some kind of non-family entity. Only 2.2%. Compare that to the 98% that is owned by family. But an amazing statistic is these farms produce 15.2% of all of the food that we eat. So we have 98% of the farms producing 85%. And then we have another 2.2% producing 15.2% of the food that we eat. Well, what that means is, yes, a majority of our food is coming from family-owned and operated farms, but that means that these non-family owned and operated farms are a lot more efficient, a lot more effective as to be able to produce a lot more food. But the myth of that majority of these farms are going to be major corporation farms is just not true. Now, if we jump over here and we talk about the farm types, the last thing I want to talk about today, there is a system developed by the USDA that classifies the farms by the size, by their operation size, their economic size, and their operator characteristics. So what it does is it looks at how large is this farm, how much money is this farm generating, how much revenue is this generating, and then it also looks at the operator characteristics, such as a statistic I was seeing a while back is that a large portion of the farmers are actually, or large portion of the owners of the farms are over 65. Or different characteristics such as how many are women, how many are men, how many are over the age of 65, how many are younger, how many are third generation farmers, or something of that nature. It looks at the operator characteristics while also looking at the economic size of it. They did a study and they wanted to see what is the primary occupation of farmers. Bear in mind that to be considered a farmer, you only have to generate $1,000 in revenue. When they went and asked all these farmers, what is your primary occupation? 14% said that they are retired. We had 40% say that they generate their income off of non-farm income. So that could be something as simple as somebody works somewhere and then also has a ranch on the side, or they have a farm on the side, or they maybe the husband stays at home and tends to the farm, but the wife is a lawyer in town somewhere, so she brings in, say, $90,000, and he brings in a net profit of, say, $40,000. Well, the primary occupation of that family would be considered non-farm income. So 40% of the people said that the majority of their income comes from non-farm income. Now, something else. 38% of the people that responded to this study said farming is their primary occupation. That's a great statistic. That means we have a lot of farmers. It means that the majority of them are not just hobby farmers. But here's the kicker. The amount of revenue that they bring in would be, I think it was $250,000. $250,000. That might sound like a lot in revenue, but whenever you factor in their costs, you found out that the majority of these families were the ones that said that they produce 38%, that they're not economically viable. that the amount of money that they're generating, although it may seem like a substantial amount, their costs are high enough to offset it enough to the point where they can no longer raise a family off of the profits that they're making on that farm. So that even though they say farming is their primary occupation, whenever you put it down on paper, they're not making enough off the farm to raise a family. So we consider them not economically viable. That leaves 8%. 8% of the farms in the United States are large enough to be economically viable. They generate enough revenue, keep their costs low enough to be considered economically viable farms. Just 8% of the farms. What leads into another amazing statistic is that out of these 8%, the 8% of these farms that are economically viable generate 2/3 of all of the sales of all of the agricultural goods. That means that we have 8% of the farms generating 2/3 of all of the sales. That is an amazing quantity. That is an amazing amount. It means that a lot of these farms just aren't large enough to generate much sales, but whenever you get into those large farms, they become exceedingly larger. That's why 2.2% of the farms, these corporate farms, produce 15.2% of the food, because they're large enough. They're within this 8% right here, and they're large enough to be able to generate an economically viable farm, because it's not a family business, it's a business transaction, so it needs to generate money. And out of this 98%, the reason 98% only produce 85% of the food is because the majority of these 98% fall into this category right here. Are these non-economically viable farms, or they're these retired or primary non-farm income farmers. So yes, there might be a lot of them, but they're not large enough to keep generating those high volumes of food, leading this number to be substantially lower than, as you compare it to the percentage, as this is to that percentage. This leads to a new trend in the United States. The trend is becoming hobby farmers. These people are more or less hobby farmers. They're not farming for the money of it. They're farming for the lifestyle. They're farming for that enjoyment, that personal satisfaction of being a farmer. And that's leading to smaller, more hobby farms throughout the United States.